Okay, good morning everyone and Chazak Baruch. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Thursday morning as we are studying together Parshat Ki Tetze. Ki Tetze, my friends, is a jam-packed parasha, and I think it is the parasha with the most commandments in it. It has 74 commandments, okay? So just think about that for a second. The whole Torah has 613 commandments, Tariag mitzvot, okay, numerical value of Tariag, 613. Our parasha has 74 of them, okay? 74, that's a big percentage, okay? That is more than 10% found in this one parasha alone, okay? I think Kedoshim is second place with 51 commandments, okay? So just between these two parashiot alone, we have 125 out of the 613, okay? So we're talking about, a fifth? A fifth of all of the commandments can be found in two parashas of Kedoshim and our parasha Ki Tetze, okay? So really it's going to be super difficult to summarize the parasha or to even be prepared for the parasha when you enter the synagogue. You know, even if I give you 10 classes this week, you're still not going to be prepared because there's 64 commandments that we can't discuss. We could only talk about 10 of them, okay? That is the difficulty when we deal with parashiot like this, as opposed to when you deal with a parasha like Noach, okay? You talk about, one thing and one thing only, Noach, okay? That's what you're talking about. And you could enter the week knowing, okay, this is the guy and this is the flood and this is the story. And you have a nice insight, a novelty, a way of understanding it on a deeper level. Not so when you're dealing with our Parshat Ki Tetze, because again, so many commandments, what am I going to talk about? What are we going to discuss? So that is the challenge. But of course, like our rabbis say, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, velo ata ben horin libatel mimena. Okay, so although we may not finish, but we still must at least start. So here we are. We had a few classes already. We spoke about this week the ben sorer umoreh. We spoke about the wayward child. We had a class about recognizing the enemy, know the enemy, the yetzer hara, ki tetze milchama. Right? We had, what was the other topic? We spoke about a few different topics this week. Today, let's talk about something that halachically maybe is not so relevant anymore, but there's still a very important lesson. Okay, so please fast forward to the middle of the parasha, chapter 24, Perek Chav Daled, Pasuk Het. Okay, chapter 24, Pasuk 8. And again, today's class is sponsored anonymously for the Refuah Shlema of all Am Yisrael. Amen. Okay, so here we go. Let's read the Pasuk together. Hishamer benega hatzaraat lishmor meod vela'asot. Okay, be very, very careful when it comes to the nega tzaraat, okay? Who remembers what's tzaraat? Tzaraat is, remember, it's the skin disease. Leprosy is what we call it today. Not so much like leprosy, but similar to leprosy. It's a discoloration either on the skin or on clothing or on a person's home, okay? This is called tzaraat. And we learned about it. We had two parashiot discussing in length back in the book of Vayikra, discussing in length all the laws of tzaraat, right? Of leprosy and how to diagnose it, and then how to be cured from it. Parashat Tazria, Parashat Metzorah, right? We spoke about this in length as well back then. So our parasha Ki Tetze, and it's good just to remember that our book in general is called the book of Devarim, which means Deuteronomy in English, Mishneh Torah. It is repeating a lot of what we learned already, and we still learn many lessons. So here is a commandment to be careful when it comes to tzaraat. Okay? What does that mean? Be careful when it comes to tzaraat. What exactly is the mitzvah here? What's the commandment? When you tell me to put tefillin on, I got it. Put on tefillin is a very simple commandment. When you tell me to, wear tzitzit, I got it. When you tell me, don't put a fire on Shabbat, makes sense. What does that mean? Be careful with tzaraat. What does that mean? Be careful. Be careful in what? So over here, let's read Rabbeinu Bachye. Yazhir shelo yekatzetz adam simane baheret. Okay? So over here, there's a commandment not to cut off your tzaraat. That's what it means, be careful. Be careful not to play with it. Don't try to surgically remove it. Don't try to color it. Don't try to color makeup over it. Go to a kohen and let him diagnose the problem. Okay? Interesting halacha. We're not allowed to cover up the tzaraat. Okay? Again, it doesn't apply today because today people, it's not talking about today's type of leprosy that people have. If a person has a discoloring or some type of thing they want to remove surgically, okay, that could be okay. The pasuk's not talking to today's time. We don't have really today the original, the OG tzara'at, okay? But be it as it may, back then at least, Torah is warning, don't cut off your tzara'at, okay? Now there's an interesting question. Let's say the baby, when you do a brit milah on the child, let's say he has on his foreskin that you're going to cut off, let's say he has tzara'at on that foreskin. So you're going to end up, you're going to cut off a piece of the skin from the brit milah, and the piece that you're cutting off has on it tzara'at. Is that a violation of this pasuk? So Rabbi Farhi continues quoting the Gemara, right? And he says that you are allowed to do it. Okay? You are allowed to cut off the brit milah, even if it has leprosy on it, and there's no violation. Who could think of what's the reason? There's a very famous rule over here that's applied in a few places. And the rule is, when it comes to many mitzvot, aseh dohe lo ta'aseh, that the positive pushes off the negative. Okay? So over here you have a positive commandment of doing the bris, and you have a negative commandment of don't remove leprosy. Okay? So the positive overrides the negative. Okay? The Ramban explains that in general, the reason, the psychology behind it is that aseh, the do's in general, the do's come from love. When I do something, it's because I love you. The don'ts come from fear. If I don't, right? Because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of, I don't want to, right? As an example, when it comes to our parents, there's two mitzvot, two separate mitzvot. Kaved et avicha ve'et imecha, respect your parents, honor your parents, and ishimo ve'aviv tira'u, and fear your parents. And what is the difference between respect and fear? How do I apply that to my life? Fear my parents and respect my parents. And the Gemara gives examples of each, and you'll see in a minute how the examples are actually talking to two separate categories. Fear is an example. The Gemara says, don't sit in his chair or her chair. You can't sit in your parents' chair. Okay, if there's a seat known, that's their seat in the dining room table, you're not allowed to sit in that seat. Now again, if a parent forgoes and forgives and is okay with it, that's something else. But we're not allowed to sit in their seat. We're not allowed to contradict them. We're not allowed to say, you're wrong. I mean, that's a very hard halakha to keep. Imagine you're having a Shabbat family discussion and your parent says something and you say, no, you're wrong. That's not true. I looked it up. You're wrong. You're not allowed to say it like that. There's a way to say to your parent, to your teacher, to your mentor, to your rabbi, there's a way to say that that is incorrect. Okay? That's all in the category of lo ta'aseh. But then, that's the don'ts of what you should do, not do to your parents, right? Don't sit in the seat. Don't contradict them. But then there's kaved et avicha ve'et imecha. And honoring, the Gemara says, that's feeding them, giving them to drink, taking them, right? So there's always, in every relationship even, there's two different approaches. There's two different steps. There's the don'ts and there's the do's, right? There's what you shouldn't do to your spouse. Don't, right? Don't ignore, don't abuse. Then there are the do's. Yes, go out. Yes, compliment. Yes, right? So there's the don'ts and there's the do's. Sur mera va'aseh tov. Okay, it's a 1-2 punch, two-step program for success in every relationship. And same with Hashem. With Hashem, there's the don'ts and there's the do's. And the Ramban explains that the do's come from love. Aseh, when I love someone, I do. So the love is more powerful than fear. That's why the aseh in general pushes off a lo ta'aseh. That's why a positive pushes off a negative. That's why you're allowed to do the brit milah, even though you're going to override, or even though you're going to violate the negative of cutting off the leprosy. Okay? Now you have to be careful to not apply this rule on your own, because a lot of times you may think it's so if that's the case, Rabbi, then I should be allowed to do that because you said the rule. Positive overpowers the negative. So, right, I'm allowed to steal so that I could give tzedakah maybe. Because positive overpowers negative. Of course not, right? Of course not. Each case needs to be analyzed and understood and studied properly. And then if it is a case of positive overriding negative, then yes, that's the halakha, like over here. Okay, so this is the, again, not so practical halakha today of be careful when it comes to leprosy, not to get rid of it. Okay, you got to go to the Kohen. The pasuk right after continues and says, Zachor et asher asa Adonai Elohecha leMiriam. And remember what God did to Miriam, Baderech betzetche miMitzrayim, when you were leaving Egypt. Okay, and this is one of the few Zachors that we have in the Torah. There are I think six things that we are to remember as Jews every single day. Okay, commandments from the Torah. Who could tell me what they are? I'll give it a minute. If you want to type it in on the side. What are the 6 things that we ought to remember every single day? If you can't type because you're driving, you could also try to lip say it, and I'll try to lip read. Okay, that's 1. Good. Very good. Amalek. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. That's actually at the end of our parasha also. Okay? So there's a commandment to, which by the way, just FYI, if you didn't get a chance to make it to synagogue this past, February, when we read Parashat Zachor, if you couldn't hear it in synagogue, then this is a great week to go to synagogue and listen to the reading of Amalek to fulfill the positive commandment of once a year, remembering what Amalek did, okay? So try to make it to synagogue this week, especially if you haven't fulfilled the obligation. It's a mitzvah deoraita. Very few readings from the Torah are obligatory from the Bible, from the Torah. And this is one of them, okay? So yes, you have to remember what Amalek did. What else do we have to remember? Zachor, Shabbat. You got to remember Shabbat. Okay? What else do we have to remember? Right? So one of them, number 3 over here, right here. Zachor, we have to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim is another one, right? Very good. And Zachor et asher asa Adonai Elohecha leMiriam. And the question is why? Why is Miriam so important to remember? I understand that I have to remember what Amalek did to us as a nation. Shabbat, I have to remember, it's the pillar, it's the base of belief, it's the expression of emunah. I understand why Mitzrayim, it all goes back to Egypt. But why exactly is it important to remember what happened to Miriam? And again, remember, what exactly are we to remember? What happened to Miriam? So over here, Rabbi Farhi says, Zo mitzvat aseh al inyan lashon hara. Really, the Torah over here is giving you a positive commandment. Remember, that's aseh, that's positive. Remember, it's a positive thing. You have to proactively remember. Okay? So there's a mitzvat aseh of lashon hara, of gossip. This pasuk, when it says, remember Miriam, what it's really saying, says Rabbi Farhi, is remember that you should be careful of how you talk. Sheniskor lashon hara shel Miriam. Remember when Miriam, she spoke gossip. Ve'ha'onesh she'ira la. And remember what happened to her. Al shedibra b'Moshe. She spoke about her brother. Ve'chal aleha onesh hatzaraat. And what did she get for speaking about her brother Moshe? Miriam got leprosy. And therefore, now we understand why this pasuk of remembering Miriam is nismach, is juxtaposed le pasuk shelemala to the one right before it that spoke about being careful in regards to the leprosy. And therefore, the pasuk here is not only telling us to remember Miriam, but it's telling us to remember not to speak gossip. Remember, my friends, what was the exact story? Let's remember. Let's go back. We read it 2 months ago. Miriam is who? Who is Miriam? She is, no, not the golden calf. Nothing to do with the golden calf. Miriam is Moshe's sister. Okay, Miriam had 2 brothers. One of them was Moshe. One of them was Aharon. And one day, Miriam is hanging out, and Midrash tells us this. Miriam was hanging out with her sister-in-law, Tzipporah, Moshe's wife, and they're talking, I don't know about what. Where are you going to go for winter vacation? What are you planning to do for Rosh Hashanah? Where are you going to spend it? By the in-laws, by the parents? You're going to go to Yitro? Okay, I don't know what they're talking about exactly, but basic lady talk maybe. All of a sudden, they find out that Eldad Umedad, 2 fellows, just received prophecy. They just became prophets. And Tzipporah, when she hears this, she says an innocent comment. She says, oh boy, I feel bad for their wives. Miriam's like, why do you feel bad for their wives? They're prophets, good for their wives. Tzipporah says, no, because now that they're prophets, they can no longer be with their spouse anymore. They must abstain, right? That's what prophets do. We're not allowed to be intimate with our partner. And therefore, like me and Moshe. So that's why I feel bad for their wives. And Miriam, she pauses and she says, wait, 1 second. You are not with Moshe? You've separated from him? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know why. I mean, I didn't separate from my husband. Hey, Aharon, let me ask you something. Did you separate from your wife when you got married? You didn't either, right? I don't understand. Why did Moshe separate? I mean, I feel bad for Tzipporah here. She should have, she should be able to be with her husband. Why did he separate? Just because he's a prophet? I mean, me and you, Aharon, are prophets, and we didn't separate. And that is really all she really said. And after she said that one sentence, God immediately called and summoned her and Aharon and Moshe, all three of them, and they came out, and God said, how dare you speak negatively about Moshe? How dare you speak negatively about my prophet, about Moshe, about this Sadiq? And she was punished with leprosy for 7 days. And she, for 7 days, had to sit outside of the camp. And actually the Jewish people paid her back. And they didn't move. They didn't travel. So that she should have to first get clean and then come back in the camp so that she could travel with everyone in the comfortable clouds. Okay? So she was paid back by the Jewish people. They respected and honored her. They waited for her to be cured. But this is, something really that has to be understood. Look at Rabbeinu Bachya over here. Yesh lanu lilmod mizeh kal vachomer. Learn from here how powerful, how dangerous is gossip. In Miriam hatzadeket, if the righteous prophetess Miriam, who did she speak about? She spoke about who? A stranger? She spoke about her brother. And hayta gdola mimeno, she was older than him. And gidla oto, she raised him. V'mesra nafsha alav, what she did to try to risk to save his life by the Nile River when he was in the basket. She followed him, she watched him, she saw that Batya picked him up from the river, and then she offered to take him back to get a Jewish nurse. Yeah, remember the story? And what did she really say? Dibra shelo befanav. She didn't speak in his face, she didn't embarrass him publicly. It was a private conversation. But na'aseh onesh gadol adibur kazeh. Still, she was punished very severely. Velo ilula kol zechuyotea. All her merits did not help her. Vegam adibur shetibra, and even what she said, come on, lo haya lashon hara. Did she put him down? Did she make fun of him? Did she say, oh, he has a lisp? She didn't make fun of him. Ela asato shaveh l'shanavim. All she said was, he's like us. He's like a regular prophet like us. So if that's our punishment, how much more so? How about people that actually speak real gossip? And if it's someone that's even more religious than you and righteous than you. And sometimes you even do it in their face. They get embarrassed. How much more so is the punishment? And therefore, Torah really warns us, says Rabbeinu Bachya, and he concludes with this note, how careful to be not to sit with clowns, with people that are low grade, that all they do is talk nonsense. Because you know what happens? You talk about nonsense, and what does the nonsense lead? You end up talking about people. And then you talk about bigger people. You start talking about tzaddikim, and he says, you know what's going to end up happening? You even talk about God. Yeah? It's going to always become worse and worse and worse. And therefore we have to be very, very careful. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he says beautifully, small people, right? He says great people talk about ideas, average people talk about things, and small people talk about other people, right? So you have to make sure not to talk about other people. Okay, that's the lesson from Miriam. Every day we have a positive commandment. Remember Miriam. Now really, the Chafetz Chaim over here, he says, what did she do? What did she do wrong? I still don't understand. What did she do wrong? And the Chafetz Chaim in his book, his famous book on gossip, on Lashon Hara, Shmirat HaLashon, he goes through different options and possibilities, and his conclusion is one thing. You know what she did wrong? She wasn't what he calls melamed zechut. She didn't judge favorably. She didn't judge him favorably. Because really, she should have asked herself before calling him out, before, just concluding and giving a verdict that he was wrong. She should have first asked, you know what, one second, maybe there's something going on here. Maybe we could examine the case. Maybe there's an excuse. Maybe God told him to. Maybe something. Before you speak, why don't you look? Why don't you find out? And the truth is, melamed zechut is something that's so important to judge favorably, right? If the newspapers were to judge favorably, they'd be out of business. They make a living on gossip. They make a living. I mean, it's probably for sure asur to read the news. Okay? The amount of things that people write, that's no facts, no basis, no dan lekaf zechut. They don't analyze, they don't investigate, they hear something, and then they write it, they publish it for the world to read. I mean, this is lashon hara on a global level. And then they find out after they investigate, after they publish, then they investigate, then they find out they're wrong, and then they post a correction 5 days later on page 84, all the way on the bottom after the fast food advertisement. Yeah, that is unfortunately how it goes. So we have to be very, very careful not to speak gossip, not to read gossip, not to spread gossip, right? Rumors, right? What's a rumor? Did you hear? Did you know? Did you investigate? Melamed zechu, my friends, is such an important midah. It's not just dan lekaf zechu. It's not just judging favorably. It's more than judging favorably. It means finding the merits in other people. I want to share with you a story in Masechet Shabbat, page 127b. Okay? Let's learn together a piece of Gemara. Grab your popcorn, sit back and relax. Page 127b. Okay? Very famous story. I'm almost positive you heard the story in the past. Ma'aseh be'adam echad. Gemara tells us how important it is to judge favorably. So let me tell you a story. Ma'aseh be'adam echad, the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat says there was a story of a man. It doesn't tell us who. We know through tradition who it was who, and I'll tell you in a minute who it was. But first he's just said a man. Sheyarad megalil, he came from the Galil ha'elyon. Okay. Veniskar etzel balabayit echad badarom. So he travels south, and he starts working for a farmer. Shalosh shanim, for 3 years. He is this farmer's worker. Okay, he's working the field for 3 years. Erev Yom Kippur, right? As Yom Kippur is approaching, he's not going to farm on Yom Kippur. He's going to go back to his family. Amarlo, so he comes after 3 years of working for this guy. And he says, Erev Yom Kippur, I'm going to go back home. Ten li schari. Could I please have some money? Ve'elech ve'azun et ishti u'banai, so that I could go feed my wife and kids. I mean, my friends, you're talking about not at the end of the week paycheck. You're not talking about at the end of the month paycheck. You're talking about a 3 year later paycheck. Okay, I think the guy owes him a lot of money. No, wouldn't you say? Amar lo. The owner says, En li ma'ot. I'm sorry, I don't have any money to give you. 3 years he's working for the guy. I'm sorry, I don't have any money to give you. Okay. Amar lo, ten li perot. Okay, give me fruits. I'll take fruits instead, and I could use the fruits. I could sell the fruits. I'll take, perot, movable. Amar lo, and he says, I'm telling you, I don't have fruits either. The guy's farming for 3 years, and he's telling him you don't have fruits. Ten li karka, give me some land. Okay, I'll take land. I'll take real estate. Enli, I don't have. Ten li behema, give me some animals. Enli, I don't have. Ten li karim uksatot, give me some furniture, pillows, sheets. Enli, I don't have. One by one, could you imagine? What kind of owner? What kind of lowlife? How could he dare have the audacity? The guy worked for you for 3 years. You're lying to his face. Okay? Hifshil kelav la'achorav. The worker turned around, halach bebeto, and he went home disheartened, very sad. 3 years and nothing to show for it. Le'ahar haregel, after Sukkot, natal balabayit scharo biyado. The owner of the house from the south, he took all of the wages. He took 3 donkeys filled laden with food and drinks and delicacies and riches and all the treasures of the world. Halach lo lebeto, he travels up north to the house of this worker. They sat down, they had a coffee, they had a drink. After he ate, he turned to him, he said, here, I just want to pay you for the last 3 years. Here's some money. He said, wow, thank you so much, I appreciate it. Before he leaves, he turns around and he says, I want to ask you one question. When you asked me, right before Yom Kippur, to pay you, and I said back, En li ma'ot, and I told you I don't have. What was going on in your head? What were you thinking when I told you that I don't have money? So the fellow said, Amarti, the worker said, I said to myself, Shema prakmatya bezol nizdamna lechavakata bahen. I figured maybe you had opportunity to purchase something very cheap, and you spend every dollar you had for this amazing business opportunity. Okay, and then when you asked me to pay you with instead animals, and I told you I don't have animals, what did you assume? He says, well, I thought, honestly, probably, I know you have animals because I work with them every day, but I figured probably you must have rented them out to somebody. And then when you asked me for land and I said I don't have, what did you say? I said probably you had a lien or something that you owed money or taxes or the government and they took it away from you. And what about when you asked me for fruits? I said maybe they're not tithed and you don't want to give it to me. And when you asked me for linen and sheets and blankets, I said maybe you gave them as a donation to the Beit HaMikdash. The owner said, Amar lo ha'avodah, by God I swear, kach haya. That's exactly what happened. You should know. Everything that you suspected was literally what happened. I saw a deal and I had to give up all the money for it, and then I lost the other deal, and then they took away my land, and this and this and that. And he says, the same way you judge me favorably. May Hashem judge you favorably. And the Ramban, quoting a tradition, says, who was this very special worker? Think about this worker. You work for a guy for 3 years, and all of a sudden, you come to get paid, and the guy gives you these baloney excuses. I don't have, right? Anyone know who this special worker was? Very special rabbi. His name was Rabbi Akiva. Very good, TEA. Very good. Rabbi Akiva. And listen to this. You know what the Ramban says? This story happened before Rabbi Akiva was Rabbi Akiva. This story happened when he was still just Akiva. He was a regular farmer. He was a worker. As you can see from the story, he's working for the guy. And remember, who does Akiva end up marrying? Akiva is a 40-year-old ignorant fellow, and he ends up marrying this lady by the name of Rachel, who is the daughter of Kalva Savua, the richest man maybe who ever lived. And she marries him, and when she went to marry him, her father said, don't you dare. You marry this guy, you are out of the will, you don't get a penny, And the truth is, Kalva Savua is right. What are you doing marrying this lowlife? Doesn't know Aleph Bet. I mean, I raised you, I put you in amazing schools my whole life, I gave you the top education so that you could be prepared to marry a real scholar, and now you're marrying this ignorant, lowlife, nobody, 40-year-old, doesn't know nothing. What in the world did Rachel see to marry Rabbi Akiva? And listen to this, the Ramban says, Nachmanides says, that this story of Akiva when he was a farmer and he judged the fellow favorably became very popular. And everyone heard about this story. And when Rachel heard about this story, she said to herself, if this is his character, if he is such a person, that he's able to see the good in other people, that he's able to judge a situation and a scenario and a fellow, and he could see them in a positive way, then this is a guy who has a future. This is a guy who has promise. This is someone that I want to marry. And she decided to marry him because of this story. That is the power, my friends, of Dan Lekaf Zechut, of judging people favorably. And the truth is, that is something that all of the tzaddikim have done, every generation, especially in this book that I'm reading, must get. If you didn't get it yet, I'm not sure why, okay? Please get the book, Positivity Bias. There's a beautiful in here, one chapter called Seek Merits, Not Mistakes. Limud Zechut, that's our topic. That in life, it's our obligation, and when we see somebody, to try to find the good in that person, to try to find their merits. What have they done correctly? What have they done properly? Looking for their merits, not their mistake. And this is obviously something that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who passed away 20, 30 years ago, this is something that he lived his whole life. When he took the helm, he said explicitly that our job is to judge others favorably. Lelamed zechut. This was what he lived by. So I want to read to you a few very, very impressive stories of what it means to judge people favorably. Okay? Look at this. I'll read to you a few stories. Story number one. There was a certain vice president of a prominent college who was known for volunteering his time on behalf of the Jewish education. And he had a lot of experience local bureaucracy. So he was able to assist Jewish institutions and prepare the applications for the state to get federal funding. Okay? This was a certain fellow. And over the years, he was very successful, and he really helped many Jewish institutions receive funding from the government. However, one day he realized that he started noticing a big drop in his success rate. So he looked into the matters, and he discovered that his applications haven't even been reaching the federal offices. In fact, they were being flagged and disqualified by a Jewish state clerk who deliberately saw petty flaws in every application. On purpose, there was this Jew who was nipping these applications in the bud, stopping them from reaching the places that they needed to reach in order to stop these institutions from getting funding. So one Sunday afternoon, this fellow, this Jewish guy, this vice president who was helping the institutions, he was online receiving $1 from the Rebbe. And he described his situation to the Rebbe. He described briefly what was going on. And in the course of retelling the story, he was so agitated that he blurted out, and he said the following. He said, "Rebbe, in the past, when a person stood in the way of benefiting the Jewish people, our leaders would intervene on high to make sure they could interfere no longer. This is what I am asking you regarding the clerk. Interfere on high, that he should be no issue anymore." Oh boy. The Rebbe listened patiently and then responded, and listened to what he said. "Even if one considers another person to be 90% lacking in goodness and merit, one must nevertheless remember that he still maintains 10% of positive virtue. There's something good that we have to look for. This is what we must seek, even in this clerk who's doing horrible things. But we have to ask ourselves, but what is the good? There's always good. That is a Rebbe's job. A Rebbe's job, someone once asked, what is the Rebbe's job? And he responded that people are like earth. Earth, what is it? Right? We're called Adam. We come from Adamah. We're called earth. And when you dig in earth, what do you find? Well, Freud, he dug in the human psyche and he found mud. When psychiatrists dig in the human psyche, they find trauma, they find horrible, ugly things. He says when a Rebbe digs into the earth, into the human psyche, when a Rebbe digs into a person, they have to only find diamonds. That is a Rebbe's job. That is a parent's job. Our job as parents, when we look into our children, is to only find the good in them. When we look into our spouse, to only find the good. Trust me, there'll be plenty of people out there in the world that will knock them and push them down and show them how ugly they are and how bad they are. That's not our job. Our job, especially with the people that are around us, especially with the people that we love, is only to find zechut. He says, the Rebbe once said the following. Imagine a Jew wakes up on Yom Kippur morning and he, heaven forbid, shaves. He eats a full meal on Yom Kippur. He gets in his car. He drives to synagogue for services. And then he sits there for only 1 hour or two. And then he goes home. The Rebbe said, those hours spent in synagogue carry great value in and of themselves. In the first instance, during that time, he has abstained from further violations of the sacred day. Furthermore, during that time, he has absorbed and internalized the sanctity of the day. And even if it doesn't have an immediate effect on him, it will have an impact on his descendants and future generations to come. Unbelievable. There was a famous Israeli comedian. His name was Shimon Dzigan. And he was known for his humor, and it was somewhat actually mocking the traditional Jewish approach. He would mock many times traditional Judaism. And many people viewed him obviously as less than an ally. You could say that, right? And after his passing, the Rebbe mentioned a story from the Gemara, and he was hinting to this fellow, to this comedian, that again, many people looked at in a negative way, that he would mock and satire Jewish institutions and establishments. But the Rebbe quoted the Gemara, Masechet Ta'anit, page 22. And the Gemara says that there was once a fellow who saw Eliyahu Navi in the marketplace, and he said to Eliyahu, tell me, is there anyone here who is deserving of Olam Haba? And Eliyahu Navi pointed to two fellows. And he went over to those two fellows and he inquired about them, and he found that these two guys were jesters. They were jokers, they were clowns. And all they didn't learn, they didn't do any mitzvot, but what they did all day was they would bring joy to people. And for that, they merited the world to come. The Gemara doesn't say that they were scholarly. It doesn't say they gave tzedakah. it says they brought joy to people, and they merited Olam Haba. And the Rebbe was even alluding especially to this fellow, who again was less than righteous maybe, but he would only find Melamed Zechut, my friends. That is the takeaway from Lashon Hara. When we see somebody doing something wrong, we cannot speak about that wrong thing, because yes, maybe they're doing 90 things wrong, but there's 10 things that they're doing right. Maybe there's 10%. It doesn't matter what. And that is our obligation, to notice at the virtues. Everyone has virtues, everyone has flaws. What do we see? What do we see when we see other people? We have to see only the virtues, the ma'alot. Ma'ala means a virtue. Matter of fact. Remember when we were fighting Amalek? It says that Moshe sat on top of the mountain on a rock, and when he would raise his hands, the Jews would win. And when he would lower his hands, the Jews would fall, they would lose in battle. And the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, V'chi yadav shel Moshe osin milchama. Could it really be so simple that Moshe's hands were going to dictate the success of the war? If his hands go up, they win. If they go down, they lose. What exactly does the Torah mean by this story? And the Mishnah elaborates and explains. You see, when Moshe's hands went up, then the Jews would look up. The Jews mistaklin klapei mala. And then when he put his hands down, they would forget. So when his hands were up, they would look up and they would remember, and then they would win. And on a simple level, it means that when he would throw his hands up, they would look up at Hashem and remember that their source of victory comes from Hashem. And remembering God, they would be victorious. Rabbi Bernstein, though, explains a little bit deeper, a little bit more, I think, more beautiful. Rabbi Bernstein says, Moshe's hands are significant. He didn't lift up his stick. He lifted his hands. You know why his hands? What do we know about Moshe's hands? We know Moshe's hands actually turned into tzara'at themselves. Remember when he was on the burning bush talking to God for 7 days? And back and forth they were battling, should he go, shouldn't he go? Send Aharon, right? And one of the things Moshe said to God, you're going to send me, I'm going to go. They're not going to believe me, God. I'm going to waste my time. They won't believe me. And God says, they're going to believe you. Let me give you a sign. And one of the signs is his stick turns into a snake. And another sign is his hand turned into leprosy, tzara'at. And what's very interesting about both of these signs, what do leprosy and the snake have in common? Both have to do with gossip. Remember that leprosy is a punishment for gossip, and the snake the serpent was the first creature to ever speak gossip. The snake spoke Lashon Hara. So the hand of Moshe turned into tzara'at was actually a punishment in a way for Moshe. He spoke gossip. What did he speak? What did he say? He said, they won't believe me. He put the Jews in a lower level than they really deserved. They don't believe you? Who said they won't believe you? They have faith. They're ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. Of course they'll believe you. You can't talk like that about Jewish people. You have to give them benefit of the doubt. Judge favorably. So watch this. When Moshe was on the rock on top of the mountain and his hands would go up, the Jews would look at his hands. Umistaklin klapei ma'la. They would look not up at Hashem. They would look at ma'ala. What is ma'alot? Ma'ala means the virtues. When they would see Moshe's hands, they would remember, in life, we must look at each other's virtues only. Never the flaws. Merits, not the mistakes. That's what we have to do when we see Moshe's hands. We have to look at each other's merits. That's what the hands reminded them about. And this is, again, the ways of the tzaddikim. To always find merit, limud zechut, on Am Yisrael. Limud zechut, on Am Yisrael. So there is one last story over here. A beautiful story. The Rebbe founded an organization to counter attempts by Christian missionaries and fringe religious cults to recruit Jews. Of course, today you go anywhere in the world, you find a Chabad Lubavitcher. They're putting tefillin on people. They're handing out Shabbat candles. They're maybe they're asking you if you if you want a lulav and etrog, if you want to hear shofar, right? It's really amazing. Wherever you go, there's always a Lubavitcher. Probably they said they were also the first people on the moon, according to some opinions. Okay, but either way. So the story is told that the Rebbe used to send out Jews. He founded an organization, again, to counter the attempts of these missionaries. He did so anonymously in order to attract support from Orthodox communities that weren't Chabad Lubavitcher. But then the Rebbe's role became known, and one of the organization's leaders removed his name and started his own effort along the same exact lines, basically creating a competition to the organization that the Rebbe started. And he would even pull some supporters of the original institution and take donors to his group. Well, one of the managers of the original organizations came to the Rebbe and he said, first he went to the guy and he said, I heard you opened this other organization, and this other guy flatly denied being involved with forming the newer organization. Now this guy knew it to be a lie. He knew this guy was involved in opening and starting this new rival organization. So he went to the Rebbe and told him the story. And he said, Rabbi, I don't understand. How could he put politics before principles? And he was in anguish. The Rebbe responded, and he cited the Talmudic discussion. It's something that we said in the past. We'll say it again. We know that and we'll end with this idea, my friends. We know that every 3 or 2 years, there's what's called a leap year. Okay, in Jewish calendar, we have to add an extra month. Why? Because we count our holidays based on the moon. But the lunar year is 11 days shorter than the solar year. So if you do the math, this year, whatever date Rosh Hashanah is going to fall on, in a year it's going to be 11 days earlier, and in 2 years another 11, and in 3 years another 11. And if you think about it, in another 6 years it's going to be, instead of in September, the Rosh Hashanah is going to be in July. And then in another few years it's going to be in April. And then it's going to be in December. You're going to have Rosh Hashanah in, you know what I mean? So how do we adjust this mistake, this error? How do we correct the fact that they don't align? So we have a leap year. We add an extra month. An extra month every 3 years sorts it out, okay? Because 11, 22, 33, so 33 days. So we add an extra Hebrew month to always keep the Jewish holidays in the same seasons, as opposed to, as an example, the Arabs that they celebrate also based on the moon. So when, as an example, they have their holiday Ramadan. Ramadan is sometimes in the summer, and then a few years later it will be in the spring, and then a few years later it'll be in the winter, and they keep moving back because they only go by the moon. They don't adjust. Okay, but we have a commandment to adjust, to always make sure that the holidays fall out in the same seasons as they always are, and therefore this is called ibur shana. This is called impregnating the year, meaning adding an extra month to the year. So instead of 12 months, there'll be an extra Adar, and there'll be 13 months that year. Okay? I'm sure we're all familiar with this. Now, calculating this is a super complicated topic, knowing which month to add, when to add it. If you add it, what ramifications will it have for the other days of the year, right? You know what I mean? You do a little thing here, and it creates a ripple. For the rest, you have to know and calculate everything else that you're going to, the ramifications. Okay? So you would have very, very holy rabbis sitting on this panel, calculating, judging, deciding, voting whether or not to add a leap year. The Gemara says there are certain people disqualified. One of them is a king. A king cannot vote. And you know who else cannot vote? The Kohen Gadol, the high priest. You know why? Listen to this. Because the king pays his army annually. He pays his soldiers, whatever it is, $100,000 a year. Jewish year. And if we add an extra month, he's going to get an extra month of service without having to pay for it. Now I'm paying you $100,000 for 13 months instead of 12 months. It's an extra month of free service. Of course he wants to add an extra month. So therefore he's biased. And also a Kohen Gadol is biased. You know why? Because the Kohen Gadol wants the opposite. He wants to not add an extra month. Because if you add an extra month, Yom Kippur will be a month later. It'll be in October. It'll be extra cold. He's going to have to dip in the mikveh a few times on the Yom Kippur day. If it's cold, they didn't have heaters in the mikveh. If it's cold, he would rather Yom Kippur be a little bit earlier, September. This way, he could enjoy some good weather as he's dipping in the mikveh. And therefore, the Kohen Gadol, he's biased. Now, can you imagine this? We're talking about the holiest man on the holiest day of the holiest, doing the holiest act. And we're worried about him. thinking about a little bit of extra temperature of a mikveh? That's what you're worried about? The answer is yes. Because at the end of the day, it's a reality. People are biased. And it doesn't make us evil. It doesn't make us flawed. It's the reality of who we are as people. We have prejudice. And therefore, the Rebbe said, this is human nature. We are prone to subconscious calculation of self-interest, whether we know it or not. Even the Jewish king and the high priest. And then he reminded the manager, look at this, the Rebbe, going back to the story. He said to the manager that the rabbi that he was judging for his conduct had been a leader of a large community and yeshiva in Europe, and it had been completely wiped out during the Holocaust. Now he was trying to establish a yeshiva in New York, for which he was dependent on certain donors who were ideologically opposed to Lubavitch. This is all he has, the Rebbe said. Can you blame him for wanting to enjoy success of his important work and life legacy at all cost? Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So this is how far we have to give people the benefit of the doubt, to judge people favorably, my friends. Remember, everyone that you will ever meet is going through something that you know nothing about. You see somebody in the street, they start giving attitude. Do you know what they're going through? How do you know that they didn't have a hard breakup? Maybe they just broke up with somebody. Maybe they had a miscarriage. Maybe they have a sickness that they just found out about. Maybe they just lost a lot of money. Maybe there's a million maybes. And whoever we see, we have to always know in the back of our minds that these maybes are very likely. Listen to this amazing story that we just read of Rabbi Akiva. What did he do? He bent over backwards for a few maybes for this owner. And they were unlikely. But he said it's a possibility. It's a possibility. And therefore, I have to find that 10% chance that there's something that I don't know about. There's 10% good in this person. That's what I have to focus on. That's what we must see. That's the lesson from Miriam and from Lashon Hara. Okay, my friends, we'll stop over here. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.